Hey folks, I'm Andrea and this is the Capitalism for Good podcast. This is 100 interviews with business leaders making a positive impact on their community. I am not a professional podcaster. I am not a seasoned creator. What I am is a small business owner looking to learn from other small business owners who are making these against the grain decisions to leverage the ways in which we make and spend our money to support the community. There are links to the people and the places that we reference within the show notes and also the company mentions page. There's a link to that in the show notes as well. There's also an ad-free version as well as an exclusive between the interviews series at patreon.com/capitalismforgood. You can follow the podcast and the sister projects Bittersweet Paradox and Capitalism for Green on social media. And of course, I would love to hear your thoughts, your recommendations, and especially about the good things that you see in the community. So please reach out and share away. All right, folks, today we have Jennifer Murray. She is the owner of ThreeBirds Coffee House in Easton, Pennsylvania. And this one was very fun for me. I mean, I'll be honest, they're all very fun for me. This was fun because it is a perspective that I don't think that we've had within the Capitalism for Good universe thus far. Jennifer is thoughtful, experienced, and does her best to be really intentional about how she's supporting the folks in the hospitality service industry through her business. In fact, she wrote a grad school thesis about her experience working at a high-end bar in New York and also the societal reflections that she saw in that industry. She shared that thesis with me, which obviously I read because I am a huge nerd, and we talk a little bit about that today. So when we're referencing things like the Den or some of the people that she worked with back then, that is stemming from that thesis and that experience that she has. She was also really open with me about her membership to the Democratic Socialists of America organization and how ultimately she does not support capitalism as an economic model. So she takes us into her perspective, especially as a business owner participating in capitalism, and how she is doing things differently and how that impacts the stability of her business. It is all just like so very interesting. I'm so happy that she talked to us. I'm thankful that she was able to like dig into all the nitty-gritty details and allow us just to hear her perspective and make some decisions on our own. So I can't thank her enough for doing this with me, and I am excited to share her thoughts. Enjoy. But I was doing my best to look back through how I would have originally found out about you in ThreeBirds. And it had to have been something that you were doing. I couldn't find the exact thing. It was definitely through Instagram. I was like deep diving, trying to find companies who at that time specifically were focused on giving back to their community. The kind of like impetus of all of that was what was happening in November of 2025, SNAP benefits. So anyone who was focused on like hunger related issues or like community, but I couldn't figure out specifically what it was. Do you remember what you guys were doing or like talking about business wise in November? Was it like a collection or a food pantry or something?
Yeah, I think we did a couple of things. So, we have our main location, which is mostly what I advertise on Instagram. It's our brick and mortar, like the one that's in the old building that's Instagrammable. And then we also have like a little booth in the Easton Public Market, which is just right down the road. And the actual public market has a bunch of little vendors in it, including sort of like a produce farm stand. And in November, that farm stand was organizing free fresh produce bags for SNAP recipients because there was like a huge outpouring of donations to food banks and blessing boxes and all that stuff. And those are all wonderful. And it was incredibly inspiring to see everybody stepping up for that. But as we know, those places sometimes don't have a lot of like fresh stuff, especially, eggs, milk, butter, stuff like that. So the farm stand was, because they have access to refrigerators and stuff, was able to give away a little bit more of that, like real fresh food. So we were doing that. And we were also taking donations here at our brick and mortar. Actually, just specifically so that I was sort of funneling that through our DSA, one of our DSA projects, which is to fill the blessing boxes in the valley. So we have like a little map of all the blessing boxes in all three of the major cities in the valley here. And we have each of those boxes assigned to a little box hopper person who, goes around like once or twice a month and fills them up. So I was filtering those donations into that project as well. So that's probably how you found us.
Yeah. So is that something that you guys just do year round all the time ever since you guys got started?
No, actually, we just started doing it in the fall, kind of shortly after a friend of mine in DSA got the Blessing Box project off the ground. We call it Collective Cupboard. So once she got that going, I figured that we would be a good place to drop off stuff. Really happy to be involved in that, and really, really happy that people are doing it too. I think maybe we did like a canned food thing once or twice like years ago, and like you get a couple sad cans of like whatever once in a while, but this is real. Like we have people dropping off socks, blankets, rice cookers, like just all kinds of stuff that's a little outside the typical stuff. It feels to me and to us like there's been a shift just in the last month, 2 months maybe, but especially in the last month.
Before you talk more about that shift that you feel,
Yeah.
for anyone who's not familiar, we talk about DSA a little bit and just like quick overview.
Yeah, DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, is the largest socialist organization in the United States. I believe we're the largest in the history of the United States now, but don't quote me on that. We just passed 100,000 members just last week, actually. Up until 2016, we were kind of like a little bit of a fringe group. You might have heard of someone named Bernie Sanders who really kind of put us on the map. Now we have a guy named Zoran Mamdani. You've probably heard of him too. He's definitely getting us even more publicity. And essentially, we're an anti-capitalist organization, which is pretty funny on a podcast called Capitalism for Good. I realize that.
Yeah,
But
bring it on.
yeah, right. We are a large tent organization. There are a lot of different types of socialist ideologies within DSA, but our basic, set of values are essentially wanting to divorce capitalism from the things that are essential to human life and happiness: food, housing, education, healthcare. We are advocating for a more equitable and just society. And in our minds, capitalism is the root and cause of all of the tertiary evils that we sometimes individually try to pick out of the kaleidoscope and say, like, let's fix this one, let's fix this one, let's do this. And in our mind, the way that we holistically view the world, the common denominator of all of these is capitalism. So you can't address any of them without addressing the root cause.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna put a pin in that because I feel like our conversation is gonna merge all the things together. So now can I have you start with talking about the coffee shop, talk about Three Birds and like what brought you to where you are now as owner?
I grew up in California. I'm not from here. I went to art school and got a BFA a long time ago. I don't want to date myself. And so then I did what a lot of artists do, which is I moved to New York City and made a go of it. Like a lot of other people who are in the arts in New York City, I immediately got a job bartending. And for the whole time I was in New York City, which is a better part of 15 years, I was a bartender. I definitely didn't go to college envisioning that I was going to spend 15 years of my life behind a bar, or that this was going to be my career, or anything like that. About halfway through my time bartending, I decided to go to graduate school. I got a master's in sociology, and I was getting ready to sort of try to conceive what my thesis was going to be about. And I wanted to do something about social justice, and my own political awakenings were happening at that time too. And I was trying to figure out how I could like fit all those things together. And I realized that the best thing for me to do would be to try to talk about something that I know. What I know is the service industry. So I decided to do my work on that particular job that I had at the time, which was in a very, very high-end, fast-paced, high-pressure bar environment. Kind of a unique place because we were actually in a labor union, which is a very unusual situation, as everybody knows, especially for a bar, a very strange situation. And that we were only in a union because it was a hotel bar. That was the little carve out that we were able to get into the hotel workers union. So the process of me, going through and creating that thesis, thinking about what I was trying to say with it, it really made me reconsider and reframe the job itself and myself in the job, my role in the job, the way that I saw our relationship with management, with our customers. And I just started to sort of realize, for me, it was a bigger story than what I was trying to tell in the paper. And I'll be honest, actually, like partway through, I also sort of realized I had this sort of like epiphany where I was like, okay, like I'm thinking about an idea here. I'm thinking about how this job has given me a sense of self and how I can carve out my own identity in this job. How do I take this and my experience and actually turn that into a life for myself? It was the first time that I'd ever considered that those years that I spent in the service industry might not be wasted, because you hear about that all the time, like, oh, I just threw 5 years away waiting tables or whatever. Like like it's this meaningless job. If that's what it is to people, that's fine, But for me, it was a very profound moment, and it was a very emotional moment for me too. And I realized how much I had sort of like internalized this idea that I was going to have to explain this huge portion of my life to other people as like, well, I was trying to be an artist and it was sort of working and it wasn't really, so blah blah blah, in this sort of like embarrassed way. And I was like, well, that is just really sad that I have sort of subconsciously been thinking about this way, for my whole time that I've been doing this, even though I've been able to provide myself with a pretty good living, in my own apartment, paying for all my own stuff, making a go of it as an artist. Like, why should I have to be sad about this? Or why should I have to look back on this as a failure or time wasted just because I didn't go to college for being a bartender or whatnot? So towards the end of my time in the city, I was really tired of bartending. I really wanted to get out of there. But I had the problem that a lot of people have when they're in an industry like that. We call it the golden handcuffs, because you do make a lot of money and you don't work that much. And it's really great if you're fine staying up till 5 a.m. and sleeping till 2. And so I basically realized that I was just not going to be able to stay in the city. And I realized, like, maybe I can take this into my own space, not just to open another space and do the same thing that my employers did to me in my space, which is, I think, a lot of times, unfortunately, what happens. Like when you hear people like, oh, you've been a bartender for this long, when are you going to open your own place? When are you going to be the boss? And the implication is like, now you can, now you can abuse the people under you because you've earned it and now you're the boss. So I don't know, I sort of realized, like, maybe instead of almost like a retaliation against life or a retaliation against the injustices or iniquities you've suffered as a service industry employee, taking revenge on that through, abusing other people, maybe I can see if I can do this differently. I didn't go to business school. I don't have that ideology in my background. And actually, I have the sort of opposite ideology in my background. Like, maybe I can come at this not from a business side, not from a money side, but from the side of someone who literally is that person and has been that person. Maybe I can just see if I can do it. People, I don't, that comes across as kind of glib. This was not just a like, this will be fun. Like, I genuinely felt like, I remember my mom saying like, oh, you're an entrepreneur. And I was like, well, first of all, this is not a new idea. So, but also what I wanted to say to her is, Mom, I'm not an entrepreneur. I have no choice. I have 15 years of bartending. So my choices in life right now are to continue to be a bartender, get a job waiting tables, or try to open my own place. Like, I'm supremely unhireable at this point in my life, and it's anyway, so, and that's a whole conversation trying to explain that to your mom, who comes from a whole different world. Yeah. So basically, I met my now husband and I said, I have this idea. I want to start a coffee shop. I want to see if I can make it work. I want to do it in this way. Like, do you want to do this with me? And he said, sure, let's do it. And so we started scouting locations all over the sort of greater tri-state area. And we ended up in Easton, Pennsylvania, specifically because of this property that we wanted to get. And that's where we are. Both of us went to art school. Neither of us had any business experience whatsoever. So
yeah, it's just so fun and exciting. And I have to tell you that I relate to so much. When I was reading your thesis, there were so many pieces that I relate and was like taking notes of my own like personal anecdotes and stories and stuff like that. But also, like, when you were talking about how you had this moment where you're like, okay, this is what I'm writing about, but also it's my current job, and also maybe me planning for the future and all those things. That's very much what I feel like this entire Capitalism for Good project has been. It was in the middle of a big giant career shift, and I was like, I am gonna fully work for myself. How do I do it in a way that I feel good about it? Why don't I talk to other leaders who I like think are doing things the right way and learn from them? And then I was like, oh, well, if I'm gonna talk to them, I might as well publish it in case anyone else hears. I might as well also see if we can promote it and get, their name out there a little bit. And it just kind of like spiraled into all of these different kinds of things. I'm now on the precipice of getting ready to open a community focused refill shop, like just all of these things, but it's all from like the same ecosystem of experience, which is like the very positive part of where I relate. But then there was like these parts about the service industry when you write about it in your thesis. I mean, the shame, the classism, the sexism, there were parts of the jobs that I really liked about it. But back to like the negative part of where I kept laying it, I probably wrote it down like 6 different times, was like, where's management here? Like when these people are saying like outrageous things to you and your coworkers, when you're not being treated really well, when like sometimes kind of scary things are happening, like where is your management? Because I think that whether I've been in the corporate world, whether I've been in the hospitality service industry, what no matter where I've been, the way in which we manage people has been, at least in my experience, such a deal breaker through all of those things from your perspective as now being the management of being the owner. How are you approaching Three Birds differently?
I do think that the way that we approach our staff and the way that we manage them, that is the defining difference between the way that we do it. And it's funny that you said, where are your managers in these moments, that I described. There's some pretty awful ones, in the thesis. And I will say that like where the managers are in those situations, they're usually in the office physically. The function of the manager is to be the person that enters the conflict on the level of the customer, right? So this is this happens in every service environment, but in this one, the stratification is very extreme, right? So we have the customers who are all suits, mostly men, high-powered business people. We have the servers in their little dresses and their little low-cut tops, women, all women. And so if there's a conflict with the customer, maybe back and forth, maybe security gets involved if there's, if someone's yelling or whatever. But then the next level is the manager. So the manager comes out in a suit, usually also a man, right? And that person connects with the customer, literally eye to eye. And they come out, they shake the customer's hand. Hello, sir. How are you? Right. And then the customer makes their case and whatever, regardless of what it is, the manager's job is to be like, I am so sorry that happened. And then give the customer whatever they want every time. And I'm not saying that this is the way it goes in every business everywhere, but in the type of hotel that this was, in the type of bar that this was, where the drinks are $25 a pop and the hotel rooms are $600 a night, like these are customers who will not be told no, right? That's a very difficult situation to be in as the server, particularly when the conflict involves the customer behaving very, very badly. I might be biased, but I think in the vast majority of the situations, it is the customer behaving very badly. They're very intoxicated. They're entitled. Unfortunately, a lot of the times there was extreme sexual harassment going on too. This, obviously, this doesn't happen to us here at Three Birds. Luckily, I can't describe to you like the feeling that you have when you're a person who works in a business. You're working very hard, you're working your ass off, you're getting yelled at left and right, you're on your feet, you're physically exhausted. A customer like verbally assaults you, says something completely degrading to you in front of his friends, they're laughing, and you say something back, and then they get the manager, and the manager pays for their tab, comps their drinks, gets them something on their room in front of you, right in front of you, and it's a betrayal. even though I mean, you might say like, oh, it's just a job. Why do you take it so personally? And like, and that's correct. It is just a job. But I know the manager, like he's supposed to be sort of my buddy, right? Like he's my boss. Like we talk, we're chatty, and 5 minutes ago, I might have been having a nice conversation with him about whatever's going on. And then 5 minutes later, he's shaking the hand of the guy who just called me a cunt, you know, and it's pretty bad, and so that's one thing we try to make very clear to our staff, that this is a very different environment than a bar, fortunately, and things are not nearly as extreme here as they were at my other job, but we try to make it clear to our staff, like, if you have a problem with a customer, we will have your back. We are going to be on your side, in a conflict with a customer. And maybe we'll have to talk about it later. Hopefully you don't acquit yourself in an extremely bad way either. But we have, we've had to make good on that a few times when we've had customers really cause a stink, and we've, had to say, like, I stand by my staff member. I know this person, I actually had to do this not that long ago. I had to write an email to somebody who was really, really mad about something. And I just said, like, I'm very sorry that this happened. Here I am. I'm very sorry, sir, but I was just like, I'm very sorry this happened. I'm very sorry you're upset. But this person is a very valued member of our team. They've worked here for 3 years and I trust them. So I'm sorry that this happened, but this is where I'm coming down in this situation, and sometimes you have to just let it be there, and the customer can, but at some point it's a difficult thing to describe, but just the feeling of knowing that your workplace and your boss values you enough to have your back is really, really something.
What's been your experience with like longevity versus turnover with ThreeBirds with that type of an approach?
So, not to always constantly return to the bar, but
Yeah,
one thing about working at the bar that I noticed, especially after we went union, people stayed. So, I worked at that particular bar for 12 years, and I remember like very clearly understanding that like this has so much more value than it appears on the surface, not having turnover, because people think of turnover as like, okay, it's an expense of either time or money or both, training a new person. And like that is annoying. Training is a pain in the butt. The much more under the surface value of that is having a coherent unit of a team that know each other, that trust each other. In the service industry, like trusting your coworkers is really key. I want to trust my own employees, so I want to know them, and I want them to know this business and understand it and trust us and feel ownership of it. And that only comes with a certain amount of longevity. I guess the proof is in the numbers, right? Like if somebody sticks with a job for 4 years rather than 3 months, that tells you something. And we do have a lot of longevity here. Like, we've had a few people quit after a year or two. But right now, I think our most recent hire is maybe about a year and a half. We actually had someone quit, I think last year, who was with us from day one. We have people that 4 or 5 years, we've only been open 6 years. I can't fully describe how validating that is, but also how important that is to your customers. They notice. They know if there's a new face every single time they come in. They love knowing their barista. I hope that it stops feeling like a job. I hope it starts feeling a little bit more like I am literally a part of this business. I'm not just somebody that they bring in and throw a job at and kind of yell at, and then I leave, when my shift's over. Like, it's very common for me to chat with other business owners or people who aren't business owners, and everybody reads the news and nobody wants to work anymore, and people are like, oh, isn't it just so hard to find people you trust? It's so hard to find good people. And I usually just kind of say like, oh yeah, and try to just kind of not get into it, because the truth of it is we never have trouble finding people, and it's not hard for us. But I don't really want to get into it with people. But there was one time I was talking to somebody and they were kind of getting into it about it, how hard it is to find people. And it just kind of fell out of my mouth. And then I felt sort of weird for saying it, but I was just sort of like, well, have you looked at the job listing and like asked yourself if you would want that job? Of course the person looked at me like, what are you fucking crazy? And I was like, well, no, like, I mean, that is maybe the way you should, think about it.
That's really impressive. I immediately drew a parallel to what you're talking about with your management style and emphasizing the like coherent collective unit and how important that was as a structural ecosystem that needs to work and needs to work well with a lot of the values of DSA and like supporting the collective whole and making sure that that ecosystem of our social safety nets and people's needs are taken care of. And I wonder if that is a conscious choice within your mind and your world.
That's a very good question. I think yes. I mean, I think that I want business itself to emotionally and morally function, as close to in as close of a parallel way to like the way that I would ideally like society to function. I think though, like a better maybe illustration of that, it would be to say that the internal life of a business is much closer to socialism than capitalism. And that's a funny little quirk of our life, right? That we live in a capitalist society, but internally, the various departments of a corporation all work together, and some departments make money and some departments spend money, and not everybody brings the same set of values to the table, but when you add everything together, it works, right? And I am sure you've heard of the old Sears libertarian experiment, but like that, is a situation where the owner, attempted to structure the company on a purely competitive capitalist model, and the entire thing just utterly collapsed in, a very short. You're nodding, so I think you've heard of this. It is very funny to me that these same sort of captains of industry that are so pro-capitalist are only in reality in favor of capitalism out there, out there in the world, not in here in my little world. We're gonna, do it a little differently.
Yeah, coming from the perspective of someone who put capitalism in the title of two of her projects. But sometimes I think that some of these labels that we put on our economic structures, our business structures, or even just like theories and ways of acting are a little, one, misleading. Like, I don't know that capitalism and the way that we see it now is what it was 300 years ago or 100 years ago. I mean, it's been through a lot of, if we're just talking about the United States, it's been through a lot of different iterations in a lot of different spots on the spectrum of success, depending on whoever's lens you're looking at this through. And there's also been examples of where quote unquote capitalism has existed side by side with socialism. And there are a lot of different terms for all of these different things. There are different ways that society has attempted to experiment with this and like tried to figure out how it works. And I wonder, from your perspective, as someone who, one, is a business owner, and I'm sure that other people are going to look at you and be like, how are you going to sit here and talk about capitalism like being toppled when you yourself are participating by being a business owner? But I think that there's a lot more of a story that is there, and a lot more to cover than like what shows up in a tweet in 2026 or whatever it is. I also think that there's a little more nuance to the way all of those things happen. And from my perspective, in inserting capitalism into the name of my projects, like I want to have conversations like this of like, what's your experience? What are your thoughts and your ideas? And what are you doing differently that's pushing us in a more positive way from your perspective? Where, one, do you see yourself as a business owner sitting in that world? And two, what do you hope for the future? And like, where do you wish that society would move toward?
I've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about this question a lot because, it's very obvious, right? Like I'm a member of DSA. I, talk about DSA a lot. And then in the same sentence, I have to be like, by the way, I own a for-profit business. I do think that American capitalism is irredeemable. I think that it needs to be broken down and remade in order to create the society that we want. My personal worldview is that this does not equate to a world in which no person on this earth has a private restaurant or barbershop or tattoo parlor, but that's all for down the road. I think that you're right that we need different words because there are enormous differences in scale here, right?
Yeah.
The hurt if you are structuring your business in a way that is extractive and hurtful to people, that can happen on an extremely small scale and an extremely large scale. But the larger the scale, the greater the capacity for abuse and extraction, right? And I mean, we know this. This is just basic, like simple economics. Well, again, I didn't go to business school, so I'm only getting this. I'm only getting this from the various consultants and banks and whatever that we have spoken to over the years. But the process is you open the business for as cheap as possible, preferably with someone else's money. You cut the costs as much as you conceivably can, especially on labor. You drive profit as high as it can go. Depending on the kind of person you are, at that point, some people want to sell the business and just bounce with the initial, whatever. Or if you don't, you immediately leverage the cash that you earn from opening the first one into expand. And then within 2 years, you've got 12 locations, and then you got managers. And then eventually find yourself at the top of this pyramid, and you just sit there and get your checks. That is literally, what we were talked through and walked through by accountants and lawyers and finance people. I remember our first accountant sat down with us and was like, okay, so just let me know, what do you envision? How many locations are you envisioning? What do you want your income to be? Do you envision being a traveling person? Do you want to spend how do you want to live your life? And I was just like, I don't even know where to start with this. I don't know how to respond to this. Really what I want is to not work in an office ever, live in a house that's not a New York City apartment. And I want to feel like I have a life that makes me happy and that I'm treating people decently well. And and I want to have time in my life to do the artistic stuff that I want. That's my goal for my life. I don't need to conquer the world here. I do think that people are starting to get into our culture a little more. This sort of opposite of the growth drive is just okay, let's look. I think the pandemic really helped people with that. It helped people focus on what matters. But my husband and I have never had ambitions to conquer the eastern half of the United States and fill them with ThreeBirds locations, or even thinking of the business in terms of okay, I put $100 in the business. I have to get 200 back or else this is a failure. I have to get this percentage of return. The business has to generate this amount of profit. The labor has to be this percentage. All these things have to fit precisely into these categories that have been established by who? Not clear, based on what? Not clear also, but these are just the rules. Without getting too into the nitty gritty of the financials of it, we have a different way of looking at the balance sheet. We have a very different definition of success, I think is the best way to put it. And I've said this to a lot of people. I've said it to my mom a million times, that on paper, I'm sure that many people would call this business a failure. If they looked at the QuickBooks spreadsheet and the tax return, I'm sure that many, if not most people would say this is insane. It's not a failure to me. I live in this house and I have a good life and I'm comfortable and I have everything I need and I'm able to pay my people pretty significantly above market rate and they seem happy and our customers are happy. And so what else is there? What else can I really expect from this except the only other avenue is to just start trying to absorb and spread. And I just don't feel the need to do that, I guess.
This idea of approaching business ownership, what it sounds like I heard you say was I just want to build a life that I'm proud of and that is making an impact that you can feel good about top down, every which way. And is different from this late stage capitalism. Again, whatever kind of label you want to slap on it, that trajectory of spend someone else's money, whether it's VC or some kind of investor, but you can't start until you get someone else's money, grow, scale, sell, hoard all the money and keep it in a dead-end account to just create more money. That's what I call a dead-end action. You're funneling all of the things and the purpose was for the money to sit and be money and not do anything under the guise of providing for your family and the next generation and being able you can only pay for your kids' college if you do it that way. But then I talked to folks like you, and one thing that I was thinking of going back to your thesis of the sexism and the gender roles that were happening, I was I wonder what the younger generations, who at least when I'm not I'm around a ton of people in Gen Alpha, I think it is, I don't know, like the youngest one is, they are approaching relationships differently and prioritizing things in a different way than some like I'm a millennial and other generations would have. And like how like sex doesn't sell with the kids these days the way like everything would have with me. And so when I'm reading your thesis, I'm like, oh, I wonder if this would even be possible to have this situation with the younger generation because they're just not interested in that. Is that just because this current younger generation, if that's true of them as a collective whole, does that just automatically kind of topple what we know of capitalism? Someone else's money, growth scale, hoard. If that's not the goal that's like fueled by all of these like classism and genderisms, like, is that just naturally gonna topple itself? Not like I'm asking you to like solve all of our world's problems, but like that was just where my brain kind of went of like, I don't know, is society just gonna like course correct itself anyway? Rose-colored glasses over here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I think that the window is shifting. Like it feels like it is to me. Like I think that we don't have any staff that are like too young, but most of our staff are between 24 and 40, and especially with, with the younger people, like I think that they are much more cognizant of sexism, especially the like very casual sexism that's like so pervasive everywhere. And I think that they have a very healthy attitude toward it in that they are much more likely to be like, hey, stop. Like, stop that right now. That's not okay. Unfortunately, though, that doesn't solve the problem of the manager apologizing for that and then giving the customer, so that part, not so much. I think, unfortunately, there is still a little bit of a gap between the language and the reality, even with a lot of small businesses, even a lot of small businesses that are ostensibly pretty progressive. I don't think that that's because the owners are not progressive or, or they're full of it or whatever. I think genuinely that most owners have never done this work. Like, I think that most people who own a restaurant or a cafe have never been a server. I mean, honestly, a lot of people who own restaurants have never even cooked, frankly. But maybe they have cooking experience, but it is unusual. If you haven't ever done this job, then you genuinely don't know what it means. And for a lot of people, you don't think twice about these under the surface things, which at the heart of it is just like, okay, this is an hourly employee. I am renting this person, kind of, right? Like,
Yeah.
I own this person. Of course, they would never say this like out loud, but I think mentally, this is what's going on. Like, I'm renting this person by the hour. When they're here, I get to tell them to do anything I want. They're mine for this hour or 2 hours or whatever. That's just not the way that you should treat people. We have hired people, they are hourly, but we've hired them to do a job. They're here. My people are here to be baristas. There's a lot of things that are inside that job, but what is not inside that job is scrubbing the floor, painting the walls, shoveling the snow outside, taking care of the plants, changing the birds' cages, like taking care of my pets for me. Like, the stories that you will hear of people and this is one situation where sometimes working for a small business is its own type of nightmare, because at least if you're in a corporate business, there are a little more rules, but the way that I've heard people's bosses sending them to buy groceries for them, pick their kids up from school, get their dry cleaning, walk their dog, like just all this stuff. I think if you want to be fair to the business owner, in their minds, they're probably like, well, I don't have something for them to do right now, so let me just send them, whatever, no big deal, walk my dog, my dog's cute or whatever. Having them walk your dog is not that big of a deal, but what it means is a big deal. What underlies that request and what underlies the feeling that you have that justifies you making that request, I think is what the problem is. They take care of our customers and we take care of them, and that's what our role is, because honestly, they're the front lines of our business. I'm not behind the bar on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. I've put in a lot of time behind the bar, and don't really want to be there that much anymore. So in my mind, my staff members are doing something that I don't want to do. And I'm very grateful to them for doing it because I don't want to do it. So the exchange with that is me kind of acknowledging that and respecting them for the role that they play.
I was struck by the humanity in what you're saying of like, you are not just a cog in a wheel. You are not just a piece of equipment that I'm renting for a couple hours. Like, you are a human in your person who has value, and therefore we're going to treat you as such. And I think that that's something that's so cool. And like, that piece of humanity is what makes me put on rose-colored glasses and think about like, okay, there's something good here. Like, there are people out there in the world that are like doing things that aren't just out for themselves to like leverage their business to take advantage of other people. There are folks that are actually like paying attention to the people around them. And doesn't that actually also make you feel good when you're like kind of being nice to another human?
Yeah, it does, and I think you just have to always you have to think about it too. Like, you would never ever go into a company and take someone behind a desk who's, I don't know, a corporate underwriter or like whatever, and be like, the guy who cleans the bathrooms didn't show up today, so you're on the clock. Why don't you just go in there and get it done? Because that person would turn around and say, I'm a corporate underwriter, I'm not a bathroom cleaner. In that statement, there's an inherent assertion of value, and there's also, obviously a little bit of an implied like superiority to the person who does clean the bathrooms. That's a whole other thing. But we have to extend that to anybody with a job. Anybody with a job has been hired to do a job. They're not your live-in servant. You don't own them. I think that also starts to touch on another like thing that's difficult to describe, but is so permeates the service industry and is so problematic for people who work in it, is this idea that in the service industry you can't say no. And that's from the bottom to the top, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, I talked about it with the hotel. Like, you're in a customer service business, therefore you have to give the customer anything they want. I think that's changing. I think as a society, we're starting to sort of recognize the difficulty of that, and I'm really happy about it. But in practice, that's something that you hear a lot, and that's something that every big company is always yammering on about. But I think we all know that with pretty much any large multinational corporation, they really don't care about you at all. Like, you matter not at all to them. So unfortunately, what's happened is all of that energy and all of that like built up sense of like frustration as a consumer, quote unquote, or like all the ways that you've been kind of like screwed over by your health insurance company or your cable company or your whatever company. You take all of that energy to the local restaurant, to the local small business, and you're like, no, I want my fries fried hard and I want cheese, and you're going to give me what I want. It's the chain of screaming. Like, you could go on a long tangent about how this reflects the angst that we all live under in capitalism. And, you take the fact that, that person was probably on the phone with their health insurance company 2 hours ago, and the health insurance company probably denied a huge claim. So now they're going to the restaurant and they're screaming at the waitress. But in reality, like, even just understanding as a business owner, like, I don't have to say yes to every single request. And my staff don't have to say yes either. If somebody comes up and asks for one of my staff members' numbers and they say no, and that person starts to be rude, I don't know, that's why we come down and we say, you got to go. They should have that right too. That autonomy from your job, the autonomy from the obligation, is so difficult to describe and so difficult to put a finger on, but it is, but similar to your boss, like standing up for you, it's one of those things that it means more to someone working in that environment than I can even describe. Because the root feeling that you have when you approach a customer in any kind of a situation is just like, oh my God, what are they going to say? What are they going to ask for? Because underneath, it's just like, oh my God, whatever it is, I'm going to have to say yes. So I think it's changing. But you would not believe how incensed the level of self-righteousness that you can get back from people when you say no is pretty shocking. It's pretty unreal.
How do you as a person deal with that?
I'll start by saying, blessedly, This really is not a big problem here at
Good.
all.
Great.
So this is not
Even
something that
better.
we're dealing with on like a weekly basis or anything like that. We are very, very, honestly, like very extraordinarily lucky in that regard. Very good customers. But that being said, we get a lot of email requests for stuff that we can't do. And I
Okay.
have to, well, we either can't do or I don't want to do it. One or the other.
Yeah.
And and I have to write back and just be like, I'm so sorry, but we cannot accommodate that, at this time.
Yeah.
And sometimes people get a little sauced about it and like all you can do is just so sorry. In terms of negative reviews, I think we tried to learn as much as we could, watching other businesses before we opened. And I do think that that's the most valuable thing you can do for yourself is just like watch what other people are doing. Now that we have social media, you can see exactly what everybody's doing. We make a point of not responding to negative reviews unless the person has specifically mentioned an actual thing, because I'm sure sometimes people just complain. Sometimes they're like, oh, I didn't like the food was okay, but the vibe was off, or I don't know, or people complain about the parking, or one time somebody said it was too loud because of the traffic, so we only address a negative review if somebody says like my drink tasted bad, or something specific. And we've had situations, a couple, not very many, but we've had situations where somebody has gotten really mad when I didn't give them whatever it was they were asking for. They said like, well, it's too bad that I'm going to have to just tell everybody I know to never come to your business and that you're a horrible business owner and blah 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 blah. That sucks. That's hard. It's frightening.
Right.
Like, this is my job, this is my livelihood. I got 8 people who work here, Not to mention people are crazy. Like, you don't know what people are going to do. They could show up. They could, I think sometimes you just have to have the confidence of knowing that 99.9% of the time these people are totally full of shit and they
People
just
know it.
they're trying to work something out in their own life. It's either the chain of screaming or, in their own way, they're trying to do what we're trying to do, which is carve out some sort of autonomy in their life and feel like they have some control over their life. We increasingly don't have a ton of control over our life. Like, we're in late capitalism. We are literally being controlled by the forces around us that are controlling what we need to survive. And so I have a lot of base sympathy for people. Like, this is a tough world, but the problem is that people are kind of funneling their anger in the wrong direction, like, at least in my opinion. But the other thing, though, that I think ultimately is the best thing to try to hang on to, which ties back into like your staff, et cetera. So like, once in a great while, we'll get some sort of review or email or whatever. And somebody will say like, your staff member was so rude to me. Like, I said this and they said blah, 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 blah. And this actually happened like a couple of months ago. And I saw the review and I read it and I was like, okay, I'm going to post this in our team Slack and I'm going to ask like what happened. But then I read it again and then I read it again and I was like, I don't think this happened. I don't believe that this happened because or it didn't happen the way that this person is describing, because I'm like, I know who was working yesterday and I know them and I just know that they didn't say this, and so I talked to my staff members and they were like, yeah, that didn't happen. I don't know what you're describing, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody did a little deep dive and realized that the person was reviewing a different ThreeBirds in a completely different state. So, so sometimes it really isn't about you. And the thing is, like, I could have immediately gotten on Google and been like, oh my God, I am so sorry. I took the staff member out back and I executed them. I hope you're happy. Like, just full on, like, you'll get free drinks for life. Like, I am so sorry. But at the end of the day, that wasn't even about us. And even in a circumstance where maybe it wasn't about a different ThreeBirds in a different state, like when you first open and you get a bad review that says like my drink was gross, you have this moment where you're like, oh shit, like, maybe the drink was gross. But now, 6 years in, with the team that I have, we have that confidence. Like, I know that my staff member did not throw your drink at you. Like, I just know, so stop, just
Yeah.
stop, I feel like the title of this, I feel like the title of this interview is going to be like this business owner doesn't believe her customers ever. But you have to, people are people, people lie. It's one of the benefits of not having a revolving door, because
Mhm.
if this was someone who got hired last month, then I might be like, shit, maybe they really did say that to a customer.
Yeah.
But like, I know that they didn't.
I also wonder if your experience of not having a lot of examples of customers being awful is because of the way you manage and the type of staff that you hire and the culture and community that you have built there, and that is going to attract like-minded folks. And if someone walks in and it's too loud or someone's being rude from their perspective, they're just naturally not going to come back. But if someone comes and has a really great experience and, the staff are all happy and everything is great, then in fact, they're probably going to go and tell their friends or bring someone else the next time.
It sounds so obvious that when you say it, it just seems stupid. But like, the demeanor and the happiness of the people who are serving you in the service industry makes a really, really big difference. And especially like, you have companies everywhere are cutting staff. Starbucks and Dunkin' are going full automation. Like, that's their goal, so you're not even going to have a barista in those locations. As that changes, I think the value of what we do is only going to go up for a certain type of customer. I do think that you're right about that. Like, I think that we, in terms of our values or whatever, we don't do a lot of political posting. We don't
Mm.
have tons of like political stuff on the walls. I don't think we go out of our way to advertise our political leanings. At first, I wasn't really sure about it, but I think now that we don't have to. I think that you can live your values. Again, another very, very corny term, but real, I think it is very subtle, and I think people really do feel it when they come through the door, because most people are very happy when they come through the door, but once in a while people aren't. And you can feel that they're just very uncomfortable the whole time in the space. Like, they're just kind of, and so I look at people like that and I'm like, okay, I think you need a different space than this. Like, something about our space is making you feel like you don't belong here. And I'm sad about that. But but then there's a different space that's better for you. So I think there is a certain amount of self-selection there as well.
That's a good point, that like there's going to be someone who's going to be uncomfortable, and probably I'm going to take it one step further and say like a face-to-face interaction, and they're going to thrive not even walking through, driving through a Starbucks where everything's automated and they don't have to say anything. And then if they're unhappy, they post something anonymously that goes to management, and that goes into the algorithm that decides business practices. In comparison to, I imagine, I've not been to Three Birds, but I imagine if I walk in there and I order a drink and for whatever reason I do not like it, I can just say, hey, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. Anything we can do about it? That someone's going to have a conversation with me, and whether I'm just buying a different drink and handing this one, like at some point, we're just going to have an exchange and we're going to reach something where I'm going to walk away with something that I like. That's a different type of person that would be more willing to just be like, hey, anything we can do about this?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's also why I think we don't get very many negative reviews, is because you can just come up and be like, hey, I didn't like this, and we'll make you something else. And I mean, you might say like, well, you can do that in any business, and that is true for the most part. But in other businesses, ones that I have worked for, if a customer needs a refund or if they need something else, it can sometimes be a fairly complicated process. You got to get a manager, you got to do the approval. You can't give people their money back. So then you've got a manager. That's like embarrassing for you as the like service worker. Customer standing there, then when the customer leaves, the manager might be like, what did you do wrong to like make this a problem? Like, how is this your fault? Like, so it just becomes this like very stressful situation. So then when a customer comes up and is like, hey, I didn't like my drink, you as the server, your first reaction might be to try to make them go away rather than, to just kind of be like,
Yeah.
well, I made it right. Or, you get defensive. Yeah. I don't know. And whereas here, like, they just make them something else. Like, they don't have to tell me, they don't have to write it down. If you treat people like adults and you empower them to be adults, at their job. Like the number of jobs that I've had where I couldn't even open the register without a manager.
Yeah.
Anything that you need, it's call dad to like come and it's so infantilizing. And we have a very specific management style which is very hands off, and we say that to people when we hire them, that like, you are an adult, I'm going to treat you like an adult, I'm not going to stand over your shoulder and point to stuff all day long that I want you to do, and in return for me not harassing you all day long, I expect you to act like an adult and manage yourself and take responsibility for what's going on. And we often say, like, use your judgment.
Yeah.
Just, if you're in a situation that you are not sure how to handle, use your judgment. I trust you. Like, I trust that you're gonna do the right thing here. And we do, and it's literally never, ever been a problem so far.
God, I love that. Yeah. So often when I have managed other people, my line was always like, I hired you because you're good at your job. So like, let me know if I need to intervene, but like, I trust you to do your job because I hired you because you're good at your job. I was very thoughtful about this and I know that you're doing a good job. So just like, keep doing it and let me know if you need me to jump in at some point, but you're doing a great job.
Right. I mean, that too, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. How many times am I going to say this sounds so obvious and stupid, but like, I do think that these things are often very absent from the service industry, like telling people that they are doing a good job, that I do trust you. Like we have staff members that, it's only a few weeks into working here. I hand them a key to the house. This is like a key to the house I live in. This is my house. Show them the code to the safe. And I'm like, here's where and sometimes they just kind of look at me like, wait, really? I can touch the money. I can do this. Yeah. Yeah, here's a key to the house, like trust, innocent until proven guilty. Like so often you as the employee are treated like the number one enemy in the business. Like it's so pervasive in business culture, particularly in the service industry where your employees are handling money. And I mean, I got that as someone who's worked in the industry, but also like literally again from these like coaches and stuff, just, oh, well, you got to make sure that your staff set up the POS so that your staff can't do this and they can't do that because they're going to be stealing from you. Make sure you lock everything up, blah, 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 blah. Make sure they're out by this time. And I'm just like, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to manage people like this. And if you treat people like criminals, they'll be criminals. But if you trust people, they will be trustworthy. Is this naive? Maybe at some point is one of our staff members maybe going to steal from us? I don't know, maybe. But I'm going to go ahead and say that that it's still fine. I mean, it's not, but I still want to live like this. I don't want to live in this like paranoid world where I'm looking at my own staff members with suspicion all the time. Like I just can't imagine living like that. So I don't want to.
There's a pair of brothers that own an apparel shop in St. Louis, Missouri called STL Style. And they also have a very similar management style. When I talk to them about it, they're like, we give them the keys and then they just keep the keys indefinitely. Like, just come and use the space. Like, one of their employees is a photographer on the side, and they're like, just come and use the space. Like, this is your space. And it's like, oh, you no longer work here. Keep the key. Come stop by. They have a shop cat, and they're like, just come hang out. And it's just such a cool vibe. And again, similar to you, they have this cool like trust. They've had great employees. They have great loyal customers. Like it works.
I love that. I mean, that's and we've done the same. Like I've joked that like 20 people have the keys to my house, and people use the space after hours too. I mean, we have our staff members use it. People in the community use it. I leave the door open. Sometimes I'm like, wow, I just left the door to my house open for like a while. I want people to feel like this is their place. I want them to feel proud of it and I want them to feel happy to have it and happy to have access to it. And I'm happy to take that risk to have that. So.
And then are you guys like hands-on with like repairs and updates or like covering shifts and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we were talking about scale earlier and I was trying to think of like, how would I define the scale? And I think if your business is big enough that you are not present on site anymore, in my mind, that's too large for me. So, and so that's what I think about even, when people bring up like, what about another location? What about, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, there's only one of me. So how Am I going to be at more than one location? And part of that is because I just want it to look a certain way. I want it to feel a certain way, and I want to have control over that. But the other part of it is that I want to feel justified drawing money from this business. And some people might say that that's stupid. They might be like, well, you own the business. What are you talking about? You made the initial investment, quote unquote, which like, I mean, no, I didn't. I borrowed money from my family and got a loan. So like, no, I didn't. Right. But in my mind, like this is what I want for myself. Like if I'm going to draw money from this business, money that I could be using to raise the hourlies of my staff, I need to feel like I bring value to this business. And then of course there's a impossible to value aspect of like literally doing the job alongside your staff, like doing the exact same thing that they're doing, talking to customers, dealing with people. People don't know I'm the owner a lot of the time. Like some people do, but a lot of times they don't. Like I'm just another face behind the bar. So my staff watches me get treated exactly the way that they do, exactly, modeling. I don't know. It sounds so obvious. And when you say it, people always are like, yeah, for sure. But you don't see it. You don't see it in life very often. I will say. And I want to be on site. Customers notice.
All right, my last question that I have for everyone is who's
Uh-oh.
another business and or
Oh
leader
gosh.
that you see out there in the world that's making a positive impact? And it could be absolutely anyone, an employee of yours, a client, an old boss, someone you're a customer of, absolutely anyone that you think deserves a shout out.
Ooh. I have thought so much about this question, and this is so lame. I don't have a specific business that I can shout out. I would encourage you to look a little more closely at the service workers in your life. Like if you go to a coffee shop and you see the same people, I don't know, ask them a question about their job. Ask, do you like working here? Or even just like, how's your day going? Just a little like human interaction. If you've never worked in the industry, try to educate yourself a little bit, put yourself in their position, read about it. I don't know, that all sounds so lame, but like, just I feel like a little bit more understanding, a little bit more empathy for people in these situations is really, really, really helpful. I think the service industry is something that has been an aspect of society for a long time. But in our current world, the world that we're rapidly accelerating into, like the service industry is going to be our society. Like it's going to be these people and everybody else is in the service industry. So you may think it's not you, but it may be you, in the future. And we have to establish that these people are human beings, they're valuable. They play important roles that are so much more fundamental to our society than we even give credit to. The people on the other side of a bar who have face-to-face conversations with people on a daily basis are absorbing angst, loneliness, social struggles, ambient emotional turmoil that bubbles under the surface of people as they're going about their day. And we have people who come in who, my staff have to act like therapists, marriage counselors, career therapists. People come in and just dump, and it can be incredibly overwhelming at times. Like if somebody comes in and starts telling you that they're about to get divorced and their house is getting foreclosed on, and you're just like, I'm just here to make coffee. Like, I don't even know how to absorb this. So as people get lonelier and we get more atomized, these small personal interactions are vital to our ability to be a coherent society and like function and know how to relate to each other. So if this is going to work, we have to stop viewing these people as just robots who make drinks, like little servants where you just ring a bell and then they bring you the latte, like because otherwise we're totally lost, because we are already so atomized, and this is the last thing that's holding us together on some level. So we have to appreciate it and we have to value it, because it otherwise it could disappear. Like automation is threatening all of us. So if you don't want to have all of your interaction in the future be with a robotic arm that just hands you your Starbucks drink, we need to put value on these jobs and the people who perform them.
I
Yeah.
love it. I think that's a great one. Shout out to everyone in the service industry.
Shout
Shout
out
out
to
to all the
everybody.
baristas and servers and bartenders and all the people.
Yeah, for sure.
And also shout out to you. Thank you, Jennifer, for doing this so much. There's so much that we didn't even get to, and I was like, oh God, Andrea, don't drag us down that rabbit hole also. But like think that you are very insightful, thoughtful, like intentional, and I have really enjoyed this and I can't wait for everyone else to hear this.
Oh, thank you so much. I could talk about this all day. So, if yeah, I mean, literally anytime. This is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And, particularly I've spent a lot of time thinking about trying to be a private business owning socialist and how I want to try to, I have some ideas about how next steps I want to take, but I don't know how it's going to work and I don't know if it's going to work. And, so I appreciate the opportunity to think about it and think about it some more. And these are essential questions that we as a society need to address. So this has really been a pleasure. I appreciate it.